Good morning, DevOps. Thanks for coming to our session this morning. We're going to be talking about building amazing applications with JavaFX. This is Jasper Potts, and I'm Richard Bear. We're architects on Java Client. And what we're going to do today, we're going to do a very short overview, ask you a couple questions, and then we'll get in and actually show you the application that we're going to be talking about, how we built it. We'll show you some of the scene builder, which I don't know that we've covered very much yet at DevOps, and it's a really great application tool for building your UIs. Then do some CSS styling, custom controls, and animations. Yeah. So, overview. One thing that we wanted to ask was, how many people had a chance to use the kiosk?
The white kiosk sitting just outside the doors.
So a few of you have tried the kiosk up there. That's going to be the application that we're going to be talking about today.
So our use case is the kiosk that we built. These were originally built for Java 1 back in October, and we flew them out here as well and updated the software to work with the DevOps data set. The idea really was to, one, showcase what we could do with JavaFX on small embedded devices with not a lot of horsepower. And secondly, to hopefully make something that's useful for people to search, find out what's going on, and see what's coming up next and that sort of stuff. We have pretty big queues at Java 1. They've turned out to be pretty useful. I hope they have been to some people here.
So let's go ahead. And run it.
Sorry. So on the kiosk outside, we're running on Panda boards, which are embedded ARM devices. They're a 1 gigahertz dual-core ARM device. It's sort of like an iPad 1-ish performance. It's really hard to compare the performance of these devices because there's the CPU, the GPU, but the biggest thing that seems to affect performance is memory bandwidth. So it's really hard to say this is like whatever to give you an equivalent performance rating. But it's somewhere heading towards a sort of iPad 1 in performance. And this was the application we designed for it. Here we're running it on desktop, as JavaFX is cross-platform. It's exactly the same application running on each. It was set up for touch and the kiosks, so we had the virtual keyboard and so forth. So we can type in there, or I can just type with it. And it's just in demo mode, so it doesn't matter what we type here at the moment. So we can go and log in. So this would actually be connecting to the Java 1 or the DevOps server and doing the login for you and checking your credentials and so forth. And then the first screen we have shows you the timeline. So the idea here was to show you everything from your beginning of your conference through to the end, and you should be able to jump to the now and see what's coming up and have a nice sort of timeline view of all the sessions you want to attend. With the Java 1 stuff, we also had the ability to add in other events, such as lunches and stuff. You could add in user-created events. We can click on any of these events. So we also had registration and unregistration. So with the Java 1 scheduling, you could actually reserve a seat in the room. With DevOps, there's just a way of starring it to say this is one that I'd like to attend or not attend. So there's a slight difference there. So we could unregister those. And that'll actually go and speak to the server, make the sort of AJAX call and JSON and make the change. So the second page we have is the content catalog. So this is all the sessions available at Java 1. We can search, so I can see what sessions I have there. We can also filter. So we wanted to do something a lot like the sort of iOS, because a lot of people just didn't believe you could do this sort of rich an interface on that low-powered device. So that was one of our challenges setting out. So we can pick some of the tracks we'd like to see and apply those filters.
And one of the things that we're going to be talking about as we go through this session of building applications in JavaFX is all the different animations. There's a lot of multi-threading going on in the application. When you run the filter, it's doing the filter in a background thread and then updating the UI appropriately so it's nice and responsive. There's a lot of those sort of things going on, which we'll be talking about in this session.
So the next tab we have in here is social. So this does 2 Twitter searches for us. One just on anything with the #Java1 tag, and the second one was anything within a 1 mile radius of the venue. And it's the same for the DevOps one outside, that the right hand will show you anything within 1 mile of here, any tweets. We're pulling in all the tweet feeds. So we also have the list of all the speakers. So one of the nice things here was an expandable list, so you can expand and see the description of the speaker, their bio, and what sessions they have, and say, that I'd like to register for their session. We also have the venues. So Java 1 was hosted across multiple venues, so you have each of the venues. And we can then pick one of the rooms, and it will show us where on the map that room is and what sessions are coming up in that room. That wasn't one with very many sessions, but yeah, we have a list of. And then we had all the tracks available and stuff. So it got to be quite a fully featured little application. I think if we do the same thing next year, there's some tweaks that we'd like to do of having the user experience. But I'm generally pretty pleased that it's a pretty nice application for browsing. We also have a guest mode as well for people who don't want to log in, which lets them browse the content but not register or unregister.
So let's go back to slides. So the source code for this application has been open sourced. So you can go get it off of, it's in the OpenJFX. So along with the other JavaFX source code, you can go and download it. And the idea behind that was that anybody who's doing these various conferences around the world, you could very easily map it onto your, whatever your data set is.
Yeah. So yeah, there's just one class in there you can implement. I abstracted it all out, I think pretty neatly for, so the one that's there at the moment actually is set up with the DevOps data set and their servers that's publicly available. I've also we did one a couple of weeks ago with the ARM conference in Santa Clara in the US, and then Java 1. So we've already done 3 conferences, and the plan for Java 1 Brazil will be using it as well. So hopefully this is a reusable application that can go on and get improved over time.
Okay, so that was sort of the overview of the application that we're going to talk about. And we're going to start with another demo, which is the scene builder. And with the scene builder, we are going to go through and build the login page that we see in the application so that you can see how productive you can be with using the scene builder. So let me go ahead and switch over. Let's go to NetBeans. Now, here's my application. It's called Login, and it's made up of 3 basic parts for the sake of explaining how this works together. And if you haven't looked at FXML before, it's your basic sort of MVC model, very similar to things that you would find in other, on EE side or whatnot. So our XML file here, if we come take a look at it, it's very simple to begin with right now. It's going to be all based on a layout container in JavaFX called the anchor pane. We've given it an ID. And we have also specified its preferred width and preferred height, so that's how big our login page is going to be. And then the last thing out here that's sort of important is that we've listed what the controller is. And the controller is going to have all of the actual logic for implementing the UI, and the XML file is just going to have, the structure of the UI. And if we come look at the controller, right now it's completely empty. It's just a basic Pojo. There's no magic in it. It's just basic Pojo, and it's not doing anything for us at the moment. Now I'm going to come look at the login. Now this is our main application class for this application. And you can see that the first line, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to call the load method of FXML loader. We're going to feed it the FXML file. It's going to take that FXML file. It's going to turn it into a scene graph and then return it. We're going to take that graph. We're going to attach it to a scene, set the scene on a stage, and then show the stage. The stage is our primary window. And that's it. That's all that this application is. And in fact, if I run it right now, it will do pretty much nothing because, well, it's an empty window. Whoops, wrong application. Let me go edit that guy. Okay. Now, what we're going to do is we need to edit this thing. Now, the first thing is that Jasper has given me a bunch of, assets right here. So there's some images and things that we need to use to build our UI. Okay? And I want to put that into my application. So let me open my application up, and here we can see what package we have. And I'm going to take these assets and just sort of copy them into my project. Okay, so I don't need that anymore. And if we go look, we've got all those guys there. If we go look at our file in here in NetBeans, we're going to find we now have a whole bunch of images, and we have our CSS file. The CSS file is all nicely highlighted, and NetBeans has good support in it for the FXML, the JavaFX CSS. So we can come in, we can do all the normal sort of stuff. Okay, that's all good. Now we still need to edit our FXML file. I'm going to double click it. Now, NetBeans knows about Scene Builder, and so by clicking on the FXML file, it'll open up Scene Builder for me. So now here I have Scene Builder, and as we can see, I have one big empty form, and it's an anchor pane. We can see I've got an anchor pane. Here's my library of different things that I can drag and drop out there, and properties that are associated with whatever's selected, and I've got my anchor pane selected. Now I'm going to go back in here and grab my, once my Mac figures out life, we're going to go in and find those assets that we had, because we had some pictures. So I'm going to drag background picture out here, position it. Okay, now, well, we've started. We've now got something very basic. That's good. Now I'm going to come and grab a couple other things. So we want our little badge guy. And as I drag around, you can see that you get the little guides and so forth. I'll get him fairly close there. We'll pull that one in. We'll pull the title in. I can sort of nudge it around a little bit, get it right where I want it. Select my text, bring it up. Okay, so we've got sort of the basis for our login page. Now we're going to need to throw some controls on here. So I can get my text field and put one of those in here. And I'm going to want a password field. So I can drag one of those in here. Now, if you remember when we showed this thing, we didn't have any labels. We just wanted to have a prompt text. So I can come over to my property here, and I can say username or email, and it'll show up. And I can type in password here, and that'll show up. That's all good. And now I needed two buttons, one that said login, and one that said guest. Okay, well, that's the basis of it, but it doesn't quite look like it did when we were logging in, and that's because we had, as you might recall, a CSS file that specified what we actually wanted all these different bits to look like. For example, it specifies how to style the buttons, and it specifies how to style a button when it's focused or pressed. And we have a style for the text field and for the password field. So let's go back over here. What I need to do is come to my anchor pane, and in my property inspector, I can see a thing down here for style sheets. So I can go specify exactly which style sheet I want to use. So make sure I'm in the right project, and I am. I'll pick login CSS. And now, just by putting the style sheet on here, it's automatically updated everything with the new style. So I can now come in and position everything exactly where I want it. I can put this guy here. I'll resize him. But already I can see that something's not quite right. For some reason, the username or email is in red, and that's not what I really expected. I must have a bug in my CSS file. One thing I can do in Scene Builder is I can come and show the CSS Analyzer. Now, in Scene Builder 1.0, we don't have the CSS Analyzer, but I'm running in the 1.1 preview, which you can go download off the internet. And in the preview, it's got a nice CSS Analyzer down here, which can help tell me, help me debug and figure out exactly what's going on with what I'm seeing. So, for example, here on the far left, I've got all the different CSS properties that can be specified on this selected node. I have all the default values that come directly from the framework itself. Anything that's been specified in the inspector over here on the right would be here if it overrode. Anything that came from the style sheet is here, and any inline styles would be over on this side. So, and they're ranked in terms of priority. Everything on the right has higher priority than the thing on the left. So I can see, for example, that the background color of this text field is being overridden inside my style sheet to set it to null, whereas by default it had several different colors associated with it. And if I come down here, I can see that the font has been overridden with a different size, different font name, and so forth, whereas the built-in value, like I say, is being overridden. So that's good. Now, I still have a question. Why is it red? And as I come down, I can see, in the style sheet, if I go find this selector, pound login star.text field, okay, that's going to be where it's being set to red. So I can head back here and I can see, sure enough, right here it's being set to red. I don't really want that. I wanted that. So I can save it, come back, and it's completely updated. It's got the new color. Everything's exactly the way that it should be. So you can also use this little picker here, and you can pick different nodes, and then it will show you what the CSS is associated with those. So that's just a kind of a cool new tool that's been added, and there's a lot of different sort of support and things like that. Something you should download and play with. It's very, very efficient, and we put this thing together pretty quickly. Now we're not completely done. I've built my UI. Now I need to hook it back up to my controller. So I'm going to come to my login here, and I'm going to go to the code. So my login button, and I'm going to say, all right, I want, let's say, hook it up to a method called login. Now, when I did that, you'll notice that I had a little warning that came up here. It says that there's no event handler found in my FXML controller class for the event login. Okay. So why don't I go here to my controller? Sure enough, it's empty. It doesn't have such a method. And I'm going to create a method. I'm going to annotate it with this at FXML annotation. And I'm going to call it login. And we'll say logged in. Okay. And at the same time, I might as well add the other method. We'll call it guest. Okay. So there we go. We've now got those two. If I go back to Scene Builder now, you'll notice that when I come to my on-action dropdown, it's inspected that controller file, and it knows exactly what methods are available to it. So I can just pick guest for that one. I don't get a warning or anything this time because it wired it all up exactly right. Now, when we run this application, let's rebuild him. And when we run him, it should come up, it should look right, and when I click on those buttons, we should see logged in or guest logged in when it executes. So here it comes. It definitely looks right. Let's watch our little window down here when, oh dear, NetBeans. It's always a little tricky to get that. Okay, there we go. So let's go ahead and hit login. We can see it says logged in. Guest login. All right, very good. Now we're really close. There's only one problem. We need a username and password in order to log in somebody. So one way that I could do this is I can annotate some fields as well. So I can create my text field here, and let's just call it, let's call it the user field. And I can also say we're going to create another one for the password field. Since I'm very creative, I'll just call it password field. And we can go ahead and down here we can say username equals userfield.getText. And then we could say password equals password field.getText. And that's a long string. We'll just dump them on down there. Okay. So now we're going to get some sort of information. So now if I go back over to Scene Builder, I can come to my field here, and I can actually give it a name. Come over to Properties. I'll go up to the FX ID here, and I can pick I want user field for that one, and I want password field for that one. Save it. Everything's wired up. Now when we run, we ought to be able to see that when I click the login button, it'll tell me whatever my username and password is that I put in. Okay, let's log in. And sure enough, it says that my name was rbear and my password was a super secret. So it's, as you can see, it's really easy using Scene Builder and Java to be able to wire up a UI. You just put it together in a few minutes here. We've got all the behaviors. We're able to pass information back and forth between the two sides. And our code is very clean. We only have in here exactly the logic for our application. It's not cluttered with a bunch of UI stuff that's unnecessary. And if we look in the FXML file itself, it's just an XML file. You can use any arbitrary tool for using it. In fact, there's some special support in an Eclipse plugin for JavaFX to be able to build these things as well. From code. You can auto-generate them on the server and send them to a client. There's anything you can do with these FXML files that you might want to do. But of course, great way to do it is by using the Scene Builder. So that was our demo for the Scene Builder. It's a very efficient and powerful tool for being able to build this stuff. Pleasure to use it. Okay. Jasper's going to take us through styling.
Yep. So sorry. So, Richard showed, that we just drag and drop some assets in, and off we go building our nice looking stuff. And the question I get asked over and over, is how do I make my application look great, And some of the sort of, excuses that people come up with is, I don't have a designer, I'm an engineer, not a designer, this is not my job, etc., etc.
No, it's not true that I made all those excuses, only 3 of them.
I didn't blame them on you. I didn't put Richard Bear quote at the bottom. Anyway.
It's probably there, it's just with 0 opacity.
Not quite that cheeky. So, really what I want to say to people is, doing design stuff is a skill, just like any other skill. My background is of an engineer. I put a lot of effort over the last 5 or 6 years working on visual design stuff as well, because I think the crossover of the two is you can design much better applications if you can design and push the limits of the technology you're working on. So I think it's a great thing to be able to do both. And also just for engineers working on applications, I think Apple has really raised the bar of what people expect a normal application to look like. Users are becoming trained to admire and want good UI. So I think it's harder to get away with just throwing a few buttons on a form and saying that will do. So the internet, is full of great resources for finding out, ideas, design inspiration, what sort of things to do. And so I thought I'd share with you a few of the websites that I like to go to when I'm saying, how do I need to design a gauge, or I need to design a login page, and my mind's blank. Where do I start? So the first thing to do is go and do some searches and see a whole sway of examples of what other people have done, and from that you'll start to get ideas and get the ball rolling. So the first website that's my favorite, probably one of my favorites, is called dribble.com. This is a sort of social network for designers where they can upload small images of what they're working on at the moment. So the nice thing of this is it's very bleeding edge. Design is very sort of fashion trend. Design of UIs is just like design of clothes. There's fashions and trends, and it's an ever evolving thing. So being able to see what designers are working on worldwide at the moment. And the other thing that's really nice is they have a really good way of searching. So you can literally type in any sort of problem you've got, UI control, and the chances are you'll get, a dozen to a couple hundred examples of how people have solved that problem before. So it's a really great place. And they're very picky about letting people in. They don't let me in. But the nice consequence of them being very picky about letting people in is generally everything you see on there is good design. So you can generally trust that, if you're inspired by something on here or taking, ideas and stuff from here, that, they're generally within, a good design idea. So the second one is called UI Parade. This is also, I think a lot of these came from Dribble and other places. This is what a couple of guys in their sort of spare time have tried to pull together and categorize inspiration for buttons, knobs, dials, and all the UI controls that you might want to deal with into one nice place. If you also do web stuff, there's nice tools for CSS and web development on there as well. I think there's an awful lot of crossover between iOS mobile development and Android development, web development, and JavaFX and native app development. When it comes to design, there really isn't a lot of differentiation there. So be inspired by all of them. And the last one is subtlepatterns.com. So this has been something that somewhat controversially Apple's been pushing a lot. That everything they do has these patterns in. That there's patterned backdrops to the sort of linen textures and the wood textures and so forth, for metal and brushed metal. So through most Apple applications, you see all these textures everywhere. And if you're looking for a good source where you can get nice repeating images that you can just stick in as your scene background in JavaFX, for example, then Subtle Patterns has a huge database of freely available ones. So it's a great place for that. So the next question is, you've looked at these sites, you've got a brilliant idea for what you want your application to look like. How do I then take those ideas and those images and turn that into code and something that can go into a JavaFX application? So the answer to this is CSS is your friend. CSS has all the tools in FX for doing, taking both images and vector graphics and styling all of the standard UI controls and your own custom stuff to look however you want it to look. So there are two main ways we can style controls. So the main stylable thing in FX is a region. All of our UI controls and the skins for our UI controls are built out of regions. They're our equivalent to div. They're our standard building block. They're our base Lego block. And they're very customizable. The way we style buttons and all of our UI controls is using layered backgrounds and borders. So this is all vector-based. The advantage of this is it gives us great flexibility, so you can change our base color by setting -fx base and get a red button or a blue button. So none of the colors are hard-coded, which is a great deal of flexibility, but in a lot of cases isn't needed. If you're just doing one application for a specific use case, then images are a great way to do this. So the Java 1 scheduler app we just seen is nearly all styled with images. The two advantages are, it's quick and easy. For a one-off use case like this, it's good enough. And also there's some performance benefits on these small devices that you really don't want to be rendering vector graphics if you don't need that flexibility on these small devices. It just takes a lot of CPU.
Yeah, and I'd say that on the converse, one of the disadvantages of images is that when you're running on something, or potentially running on a retina and non-retina, for example, this MacBook is retina, you need to actually supply two different images, and those images are high resolution and a lower resolution, and that takes up a lot of space, makes your application bigger. So that's the other trade-off. With vectors, it'll scale perfectly, no problem. With images, it's going to have extra size.
Yeah, so the whole world of using images for skinning has just become a whole load more complicated with retina and non-retina, and if you're doing Android and other things, then there's many resolutions to deal with. So,
but it's definitely true that when you're running on something like a Raspberry Pi or a Beagle board or something with less power, images are your friend.
So let's have a look at a quick example. I just pulled this off our blog, which is fxexperience.com. I did a blog maybe a year and a half ago, where I just took 10, 15 buttons from various places and gave examples of how to create those using CSS for JavaFX. So if you're looking for examples of how to get started with CSS for JavaFX, that's a great place to look. Just Google for FX Experience button and you'll find it. It's like the top link pretty much. So this example's a simple sort of green button with a gradient on it. So we've given it a ID of green, and so the hash ID is our CSS selector for the green. And we're then going to remember. I got all this, yeah. So the first chunk is setting the background colors. So we have two layered backgrounds here. We have a sort of green gradient that's going to be going top to bottom, and then over the top of that we have a radial gradient which is giving us that sort of arc of highlight showing a sort of top-down light source. And so we're just sort of setting up the gradient there. The next thing is the background radiuses, so it's how rounded are our corners. And the next one is inset. So we have two backgrounds, and the first one is completely filling the width and height of the region, and the second one is inset 1 pixel in from that. So that's how we get that little edge highlight around. And then we're applying a drop shadow effect to the whole button, and we're setting the text fill for the green text. So it's pretty easy to style a button to look very different to the standard look.
Another thing that's worth pointing out is that this that you did was all the vector-based styling, not an image.
Yeah.
And in JavaFX 8, we've added special code so that actually drawing with vectors ends up creating a very small texture that we can store and then resize on the graphics card. So in many cases, even though you're using a vector, you'll get equivalent performance to using an image.
So yeah, something we've done for our our own skins to make them run much faster on these low-powered devices is added sort of pretty comprehensive caching. So it's basically like using image skinning but we create the images for you on the fly in the background.
So you get all the benefits of having vectors, being able to dynamically change the colors, being able to resize them and have them scale beautifully, having a smaller runtime size, but also advantages of image that it gets cached and it's very fast.
And the other thing you pay the penalty for is a small delay on the first use of that example. So this was the page I mentioned, and there's a whole variety. So it was partly just to prove to myself and also to show examples of the sort of flexibility you can get with vector-based styling of JavaFX controls. So let's have a look at an example of styling images. So this is a button that we had in our app for tweets. And so that's the image. So the foreground of it, I have a little bird image and the text, and then I'm creating two images for the background. So there's the standard one, and like Richard mentioned, we want to create a retina one for the retina Mac, etc. And it's kind of a good practice to start getting into creating retina versions of images at the time where you're creating them. So even if you don't have a retina Mac, I think, I wouldn't be surprised if in the next 6 months we start seeing a lot of Windows 8 machines with retina displays following on for the Macs. I think the world's just on the brink of changing there at the moment. So I suspect we'll all need to deal with retina images pretty soon.
I guess the interesting thing in your example is that you don't ever specify whether you want actual or retina, you just specify the actual one.
So this is something we followed Apple's sort of style of doing things. So you just specify the image you want to use as being the low resolution one, and then there's just a naming convention of adding the @2x before the .png, .jpeg, etc. to specify the high resolution version. So when we're running on a retina device, we'll look to see if there's a high resolution available. If so, we'll use that. If not, we'll fall back to the low resolution. So the first thing here I want to sort of point out is that we want to remove all the default styling that's being applied to the button. So by default, JavaFX provides a load of styles for the grey button background and the standard look. And in this case, we want to do something completely different. So what I'm doing is doing a set all to remove the default style classes of .button and add in our own style class so that we can start from a clean slate of styling the button. The only sort of bad consequence of this at the moment is you have to re-specify the skin at the moment. And as the skin is a Sun API, it may change in the future. So I actually filed this bug, and hopefully we'll have it fixed soon, that we'll have a default value for the skin. So that line will disappear. You won't need that.
It'll definitely be fixed in JavaFX 8.
Yeah. So if you're using 2.2, unfortunately, you have to use that line. But in 8, it'll go away for you. So the next bit is just setting up the font styling, so just the size of it and the weight. It'll carry on using the default font that the application is using, I think Helvetica in this case. We set the text fill to white. There's a little hint here that if you are styling a text node rather than a label, then it's actually, because it inherits from shape, it's actually -fx-fill rather than text fill. It's one of those annoying consequences that catches you out regularly. We are setting the alignment for all the content, so this is both the graphic and the text. We want to be aligned center both ways. And then this is the sort of real meat of it, which is how do we take this image and scale it and apply it to the button? So the first line is specifying the URL. The URL by default, if it's unqualified, will be relative to the CSS style sheet. So this is looking for an images directory in the same directory as the CSS style sheet and then the file inside of that. The next line is how do we want to cut up the image? I think actually I have a picture. So what we want to do is slice our image up into 9 parts. And the top piece will be stretched lengthwise, and the middle piece will be stretched height-wise if needed. And then the corners stay the same size. So this allows us to have one image and use it for buttons of many different sizes. So the 14 pixels here is the offset from the outside in. You can specify different offsets for the 4 sides or just the one value, which we have done in this case. The fill is whether we want to paint the middle piece or not. So you might just be using this for drawing a box around something, some sort of border, or you might be using it for an entire background like we are in this case. So if you don't have the fill there, then it will be hollow in the center. If you have the fill, it's completely filled. And the last piece is, so we're taking a 14 pixels border from our original source image. How big do we want it when we actually draw it? So you have the ability to actually scale those pieces, make it bigger or smaller. But in most cases, you just want it the same size. So it's going to be a one-to-one mapping from your image.
Right, so on the tweet button, if you had said FX border image width is 7, then it would take the image that you have and scale it down from 14 pixels to 7 pixels in the resulting piece, or scale it up if it were bigger.
So you don't
hardly ever want to do that. It's almost always just going to be the same number.
So most of these properties are all based off the CSS3 backgrounds and borders spec. So exactly the same thing can be applied to divs and stuff in the browser. We literally took it straight from the CSS3 spec. So a lot of this flexibility comes from them. There's a few places where we've added to it, but it's pretty much directly from there.
Yeah. We're trying, as a philosophy point, in all of our CSS to make it as close to the spec as possible.
The only real times where we've had to change it is either where the scene graph and the DOM tree don't quite match, or cases where it's not quite powerful enough for doing full UI control styling. I think the web's getting there, but it's not quite to the point where you can have the same amount of power yet. So the last piece is padding, which is specifying how far. So we start off with our 14 pixel inset from our border, and then we're specifying how far from that 14 pixels in do we want to position our content of the bird image and the text. So in this case, the top and the bottom are -3, which means we actually want them to overlap those border parts of the image very slightly. And the outer side is 10, so we actually want to come in an extra 10 pixels of padding there. So it takes a little bit to get used to the negative padding, but it's very useful if you want the content to overlap the border part. So if you've got big rounded corners, then this is something that comes up. And then the very last piece is when you press your mouse down on the button, we want it to have a different look. So all we need to do here is specify the different image to switch to, because all the other properties will be inherited. So custom controls. So the Java 1 scheduler app is full of custom controls. So there's a lot of customization of either the standard controls or just new little controls we built. Part of this was to deal with touch, and part was just to get the user experience we wanted to do. So I thought I'd walk through and show some of the custom controls that we have, what we built and why. So one of the ones we built was the virtual keyboard. There is a standard virtual keyboard in JavaFX embedded, but this time we customized it for a couple of reasons. One, we wanted it to be the full size of the screen. So we had, most of the embedded has been set up for quite small screens so far, so we had a much bigger 22-inch touchscreen, so we wanted to have a nice big keyboard, make it easy.
We started off with several different keyboards like your iPad or an Android device would have, right? And then we were looking at this thing and we had a screen this big, and it's like, well, why the heck do I have to cycle through it? Let's just make a full keyboard on there.
Yeah.
So it made a much better user experience.
And we could add some domain-specific buttons like oracle.com, so any Oracle people who are signing in could do it nice and quickly. So the next page. So the first thing we had was a custom tab control. The main reason for this was I wanted to have some different animations and some slightly different graphics. There really isn't anything very complicated to a tab control, so it just allowed me to have a bit more flexibility over creating animations and having a bit more fun with it. Then the main part of our view is a list. So we'll show, and this is something that most of this application is all actually JavaFX list views, and it really shows you the power of customization of list views. Do we have a? So basically, in this case, each horizontal row of the tile we have, so the sort of but bubble plus the time label and so forth is a row in our list. And then we just have a style that's it. And I'm just alternating, drawing them left to right, right to left. And the data set is just very simple. It's a list of events. So, our data model for it is just a list of events. And then the styling, the custom cell for each list cell draws one of these bubbles. And it's clever enough to look and see, am I the first event in a given day? If so, I'll ask for a bit more space and draw a header for that day. So we then had the pop-ups, or popovers. So these are sort of, again, a little custom control we had that had an option for a button top left and top right, a label in the middle, and some content in the center. And they were designed to auto-scale around the content.
And here's another one of our custom list view controls. This is on the catalog view. And you can sort of imagine each one of these rows being a separate cell and sort of being laid out. But as you saw in the application, sometimes it would have different heights. So in a list view control, not every row needs to be the same height, and it's still blistering fast. So you can have arbitrary heights for each one of the cells. So in each one of these, the time and then what events are going on at that time is all part of a single cell.
And one of the reasons why we use list views here rather than just creating a big layout of all the content is we wanted the virtualized ability of a list flow view. So, on these devices, you don't have that much memory, you don't have that much resources. So you don't want, I don't know what Java 1 had, but maybe 1,000 sessions. So you don't want to have 1,000 of these blocks, all the the 4 or 5 different labels that create it and the colored bars. We don't want to have all of those in memory all of the time.
Yeah, you would have ended up with easily 100,000, 200,000 nodes in the scene graph if you just created all of everything up front. And the virtualization isn't straightforward. It's fairly complicated. And so reusing something like the list view makes it really easy for you to be able to make very efficient stuff.
So all we had to do is provide the list view, in this case, with the data, which in this case was just each item was just a list of sessions for a given time slot. And then we had to have the customized cell that just said, given this list, how do I draw it? And then it could draw that. And then as we're scrolling, it's just pulling up the next chunk of data, asking it to be drawn. While it's on the screen, as it disappears off, it gets thrown away, and we start again.
And as we mentioned at the beginning of the talk, the entire application is open source, and there's the link in the slides, so you can go and see exactly how we put that together.
Yep, and it's all released under a BSD license as well, so feel free to copy and paste to your heart's content.
Yeah, rip us off.
It's all there for you to use, so enjoy. So this was a little search box we did with a little clear button and stuff, which is just a customized text field with a few little tweaks. The Twitter page, again, is our favorite thing, another list view. It's a pair of
list views in this case.
Yeah, a pair of list views in this case. And just a custom cell that draws the little icon plus a few lines of text.
With a hyperlink.
With a hyperlink in.
This one is one that I really like, because this was one of the core use cases that I used when we were designing the list view to begin with, which was, what if I want a list view where when you click it, it dynamically changes the size of the various rows? And in this particular one especially, there are a lot of entries. I guess at DevOps there's like 149 speakers.
195, I think.
195.
Yeah.
I think at Java 1, I don't know.
We're in the 400, 500 range.
Right, and there's a lot of data associated with each one of these. And so being able to virtualize them is crucial, and also being able to have it be very fast when you auto-expand these things is crucial. And again, we're talking about a very slow device that this thing's running on.
Yeah. Yeah, the nice thing about that was, we designed it for the really slow device. Now when we're on desktop, it just flies.
Yeah, absolutely fast.
So this was, an even simpler thing. Because we didn't have huge numbers, each hotel is only going to have a maximum of like 20 rooms. We didn't need to go as far as using a list view. So in this case, it's just a region for each one with a little graphic on the right-hand side and a text node with a little bit of styling. And we're just sticking those in a VBox. So it's just a really simple construction. It wasn't anything too clever for those guys.
So here was your image that sort of talks about how that first screen was completely laid out. And if you follow all the little lines and dashes, you can see how basically what a single row was that went all the way around.
Yeah. So there's a few little tweaks over the top of things. So the very first day label and end label are just little labels above and below. We had a button that's overlaid. I overlaid some little images which had the fade outs and fade ins so that the edges weren't so harsh at the top and bottom where it gets clipped. And then I also draw so one of the things I set up was the list view has a transparent background. So the line down the center is actually drawn behind it and you can just see through. So the little zigzag and line is drawn behind.
And those are the individual little cells.
Yep, so that shows each of the separate little cells. So, you know, for example, the now line, again, is just something the cell says, am I the now one? If so, I'll draw this extra little line. So it's quite easy to have a cell that has multiple modes and can draw variations. And this goes into showing you all the images and the various pieces that go in. So there's an example of a couple of the different cells and what they can look like. We're running out of time a little bit. So this is the code for one of our list cells. So this is sort of a pattern that I came up with for 8 that allows us to basically create a custom list cell in a single class. So it is both the cell and its skin. This is just really to try and keep these as lightweight as possible for running on the low-powered devices. So I think it's kind of a nice little pattern, and you can have a look in the source code and take some examples from there. One of the important things to do is override the pref width, pref height, and then update item. So pref width, pref height is how you tell the list view how much space you want allocated for your cell. And then the update item is, so your cell can be reused for multiple data items, and so this gets called whenever a new data item is given to the cell, and it should update its graphics to represent that new piece of data.
So update item is the one that gets called, and we look at it and say, oh, am I the now? Okay, I need to draw the now. Am I at the beginning of the day? Okay, I need to draw the day header. And am I on the left or on the right? Okay, let me figure that out. So, and then that gets us to the animations and transitions. So, this is the sort of polish that you need that really makes the application feel right. It really makes the application feel right. It's just, so here's some animations that you can see. We've got the fade animations. We've got the sliding animations, and the thing resizes. It's all getting animated. When it pops in and pops out, you can see it on this one as well as it's popping in and popping out. The transitions on the slider bar as it's the highlights going on that tab pane. This expand and collapse is all animated. The sliding on those is all animated. The transition from screen to screen is all animated. And when you look at all those things, you might think, holy cow, that's a lot of work, right? There's a lot of animations. And if we get in really close, you can see that there's actually several animations going on during the login. It was sliding the bar out, it was fading things out, fading the new one in, and so forth. And you can see when it goes back in sort of slow motion here, first it fades that in, and then the bar comes up. Now, these things are all actually very, very easy to add in JavaFX. I did most of the ones that we had, I tweaked up in a day or two.
Yeah, I think it was less than a day, really, yeah.
It was just, you just sit and go one right after the other.
Yeah.
You just sit and go one right after the other.
Yeah, you just went through and added that sort of level of polish pretty much through most of the application.
So like I said, first we hide the keyboard, then we simultaneously crossfade. And the only thing that you have to worry about is if somebody was logging in and then canceled and logged in and canceled and you're halfway during a transition, you want to make sure that you cancel anything that was running and go back. But that's really it. So here's an example, right? The first thing I do is I have a reference to the fade out animation and the fade in animation. And if the fade in is running, basically, then I'm going to stop it. Then I'm going to create my fade out, and I'm going to start executing the fade out. And just like that, on the fade in, it would be the exact opposite. And the only thing is that like at the very end of my fade out animation, I just make sure that I specify that the fade animation is set to null, and hide the node at the very end once the thing completes. But it's very simple. It's just a few lines of code, and you get all those animations. So here's the popover. You can see that it's sliding from left to right. In fact, this one, and then it goes top to bottom. And we can see this again as it pops in. It started out smaller and then got bigger. right? And it's really easy to do this sort of stuff. And it's really easy to do this sort of stuff in JavaFX because you've got you've got translates and you've got scales. So you can just take any node in the scene graph and you can scale it to make it bigger or scale it to make it smaller. So that's how the pop out works. And the translate, we're just moving things left and right. So in this particular case, instead of using a transition class, I used a timeline. And the timeline just does basic keyframe transition, which allows you to say, at this point in time, I want these properties to be at these values. And at this point in time, I want these other properties to be at these values. And then we'll figure out what it should be in between. The other thing that's interesting is that you have, because we're going to interpolate or figure out what the value is between those keyframes, you can specify whether that's linearly interpolated, just a simple divide, basically, or are we going to do some sort of easing in and easing out. You pretty much always want to ease in and ease out by default because it makes it look a lot more pleasant. When it's just linear, it just looks wrong. But when it's easing, it's just like real life, where something is sort of speeds up and slows down. We don't have time for that slide. So often, setting cache true will help when you're doing your animations. Now what that does is it gives us a hint. It tells JavaFX, hey, this thing may be moving around or whatever, but it's not changing its own content. So you can render it into an image and then just move that image around, which is a lot faster than actually moving all the nodes and having to re-render all the text and so on and so forth. So often setting cache true will help, but sometimes setting it to false is better. It just depends on your situation.
Yeah, it depends a lot on how complex the thing is you're moving around. And so if the thing is mostly already images, it may not help you.
Also, if it's huge, but it's simple to draw, you don't want to set cache to true because then you're rendering this huge buffer of bytes. If it's, it's a little complex guy, definitely set it true.
And the other thing is, if it has something in it that's changing every frame, cache doesn't help you at all. It actually will hinder you.
And then, like I say, use ease both frequently. And putting multiple transitions together is really, really easy. So luckily, I got through that super fast. So you can use basically every animation, whether it's a keyframe animation or a transition or a timer. These are all animation objects in JavaFX. You can take your transitions and your keyframes. You can compose them using a sequential transition or a parallel transition, which will allow you to say, first do this animation, then do this one, then do this one. Or you can say, I want to do these three together. And you can sort of compose them together. And so it makes it really easy to do those sort of animations that we had in the
application. So there's a couple of different styles of writing animations and just finding which one sort of suits you better, whether it's using the transitions and parallel sequential or the other way of doing it is to just create one timeline and adding in lots of keyframes.
So just because we like eye candy, we'll just run through it one more time. Because we like eye candy, we'll just run through it one more time. And you can just sort of see all the different fades and the transitions and the animations and everything that goes on in the middle of that with the little pop-ups and everything. It's all really, really simple. Like I say, it just took less than a day to put those sort of animations into the application. And really adds that sort of polish that you need. And with that, we thank you for coming to our session. And if you have any questions, including the ones I can't answer, just feel free to ask them. Yeah, no? There's so many people, it's hard to see.
Yeah, if not, you can always come up to us afterwards.
Back there. Yeah. Oh. Yeah, custom controls in Scene Builder. It's a good question. I'm actually going down to talk to the Scene Builder team on Monday, so I'll let you know.
It's kind of one of the next things on our to-do list. But it's definitely something we want to support.
You actually can. Anything that's in the FXML file will be represented in the Scene Builder. But the one thing that is going, that we won't get in the first 8 release, but I'm hoping in one of the update releases, is all the sort of metadata associated with a custom control so that you can very smoothly use it in the UI, particularly with like custom layouts, for example, have a lot of metadata associated with them. But even controls like tables and things like that, they'll want to have special pop-ups and rules and so forth. So that level of integration is going to take more time, but the very simple thing of just being able to at least specify it in the FXML and have it hosted in there
I think it just shows up as a black box at the
I think
moment.
it does. And so we
so
would
at the
like to
moment
draw it.
Yeah, so
We
the
just
mo-
have to construct the class path for
At the
it.
moment, it's a black box, and hopefully we'll get to the point where you have all the same controls we do for the standard ones to have custom editors and everything else.
In fact, we were very careful to build the thing so that we weren't using any magic from inside Scene Builder, but it was delegating to these prototypes that we have of this metadata. But, yeah?
What about the testability? Is there some kind of robot framework or something?
Yeah. Good question about testability. Is there a robot framework? So obviously you can do JUnit tests and so forth for certain sort of things. But if you need to do visual tests, we have what we use for doing all of ours, and we have thousands of these tests, is called Gemi and JemiFX. And JemiFX is well, both of them are open source. Gemi is a general purpose tool for this that can be used with Swing or FX or various other UI toolkits. And JemiFX has the extensions to it to be able to test with FX. It's not been productized to the level that FX has. It's just an open source tool. But we'll be putting more work in that because all of our test framework is based on it. So I think that's it. We got the red screen. So thanks for coming. Hope you got something useful out of the session and enjoyed it. Thank you.